Okay, hey there, folks. As the world outside our doors continues to go just a little bit bonkers, I figured I would keep bringing book tour to you. So, welcome to Russ's Rockin' Rollercoaster, intriguing interviews with creative minds. Now, I've become such a humongous fan of tonight's guests, and if you, like me, love some humor with your blood-soaked horror, I couldn't think of a better guest for our to keep rocking and rolling in 2025 with other than Christopher Golden. Chris is the New York Times best-selling author and multiple award-winning author of such novels as Road of Bones, All Hallows, Ararat, and The House of Last Resort. With Mike Mignola, he is co-creator of the Outerverse comic book universe, and he has also written for film, TV, video games, animation, and has contributed to series including Hellboy and Buffy the Vampire Slayer, among others. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
All right, just a heads up to the folks at home. If you have any questions or comments for Chris, put them in the chat box and we'll get to a few at the end. All right, Chris, as we always do, we're going to start at the beginning. So, where were you born? Where'd you grow up?
I was born in, was I born in Framingham, Massachusetts or Boston, Massachusetts? I can't even remember. I wasn't, I mean, I was there, but
I
I
was
think
there.
I was born in Framingham, but I grew up in Framingham. I lived there till I was 18. So,
Okay. All right, so you've been essentially you're a Boston guy.
yes,
Yes.
yeah. I grew up in suburban Boston and lived in New York for a few years and
Yeah.
have spent the rest of my life back here in Massachusetts.
All right, well, it's gonna be tough. I mean, I'm a lifelong Yankees and Jets fan, so we're gonna have some beef here.
That's fine.
Okay, I'm
You
just
know,
kidding. I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. So what was the situation like for you at home? Do you have brothers, sister? You mentioned a little before, brothers, sisters, just you. Like, what was the lineup at home?
let's see. I'm the youngest of three. My older sister, Erin, is 8.5 years older than I am. My brother Jamie is 2 years older.
Okay.
And our parents were interesting characters. They divorced when I was 11, I think.
Know that story?
And
Been there?
no, it was actually good. We were like, I loved my dad, I loved my mom, but I hated them together.
Hmm.
My brother and I were still at home when it happened, and we were relieved when they got divorced. It was much better. But yeah, so that's the story.
So let me. All right. So your sister really was. You guys were never in the same school together, but because she's eight plus.
No, we went to the same school, but we weren't in school together. But we're actually really close. So which doesn't often happen, I think, with siblings with that age
That
difference.
gap. Yeah, yeah. So talk to me
Um,
about that. So when you were, so there was enough of a gap where, you never had the same, you were never in the same social circles. There was distance between you guys. Did you guys get along when you were younger and did you get close later or like what?
it's interesting. I mean, so basically, my brother and I fought like crazy because we were so close in age.
Right.
But we were, it was that thing where it was like, nobody could be an asshole to my brother except me. You know what I mean?
Oh
It
yeah.
was that kind of thing, right? And so he was really good about we were terrible to each other. We were constantly fighting, but he was really good about like, I didn't want to smoke weed, and if his friends were like, "Come on, man," he'd be like, "No, leave him alone." So he was really good with that stuff.
Right.
And my sister's gay, and it was hard for her, I think.
Right.
Um, but it was really instructive for me. I learned a lot. And my mom, my dad wasn't really around much, even when they were still married.
Mhm.
So when they got divorced and he was just really not around, uh, but even before that, my sister was kind of looking out for us a lot when we were young.
Mhm.
Even again, I should say, even when they were still married, so many times. And then my mom was working 70 hours a week. Um, and so my sister was really kind of like the one. So we were basically like around. I used to always joke that I was raised by a passel of lesbians. Um, so it was my sister and her girlfriend and their friends and stuff like that. So it was a very weirdly, it was a very positive, despite what she was going through in dealing with the world around her. It was a very positive experience for me because um, I felt like we were all on the same side,
Mm.
you know? Um,
Okay. So actually, I want to talk. So the reason, I mean, there's a lot of reasons. So when I was in my mid late 20s, my first full time, I was a journalist back then. It was a small company, and after a while, I was the only straight guy in the office. This was sort of
mhm.
during like when Will and Grace was like edgy comedy, right?
Yeah, yeah,
But but I got such an education, and I really learned. It's not that I dismissed like the gay community. I didn't. I just wasn't immersed in it, so I just didn't have knowledge. And then within a few years, they actually coined me. They called me. I was an honorary queen because I was part of their
yeah.
world. So, but talk to me about. I mean,
Amber Benson once referred to me in a large auditorium as the big hairy lesbian, and that name stuck. Um,
so to talk.
no, look, the thing is that I remember I remember my parents fighting about it. I don't remember the sequence of events, but um, when I was, I think, 13 or 14, I was visiting my sister and her girlfriend, who's now her wife, were living together in Fort Lauderdale. And I was visiting my grandmother who lived in Miami. And then we went, I was hanging out with my sister and her girlfriend. And while we were driving over to their apartment, my sister very anxiously was like, listen, I have to tell you that, you know, Eileen is my girlfriend. And I said, I know. And this was like 1981.
Right.
And she's like, no, no, I mean, she's my girlfriend. And I was like, I know. Like, what is it? It's not me.
Yeah.
And she
Right.
was so relieved
Right.
because, of
Right.
course, it was easy for me because I wasn't the person who was living that life. So it was hard for her. But basically, like, I still remember my parents having this argument. And I don't know what got my mother sort of in an uproar. My mother was always obsessed with outward appearances and how things looked to people
Mhm.
outside the house, right? So I don't think she was necessarily homophobic herself, but I think she was obsessed with. She was, I think, had narcissistic personality disorder. She died 4 years ago, and which started to show itself already at that point. But in any case, I remember really clearly the argument that they had. I was in the other room. I'm sure that my father thought I was asleep, and my mother at some point insisting she didn't know any gay people. And my father just like lost it because he was like, "What are you talking about? Your brother is gay. Your niece is gay. Your nephew is gay." He's naming your best
Right.
friend. At the time, she had a best male friend who
Right.
was gay,
Huh.
and like my father just couldn't believe that she was in such total denial. Um, so weirdly, I've never sort of looked at it this way before, but I think aside from my sister and her friends, and my exposure to the sort of camaraderie that I felt from them, um, I think my father's reaction and his sort of like frustration with the idea that she would be as uptight about it as she was had a real impact on me.
Yeah. Interesting. Wow. Okay. Because I mean, I shouldn't say I don't want to paint people with too broad a brush, but if anything, at least historically, in families, it's more often than not, it's, the male figure who is overtly less accepting and willing to, embrace, the fact that there's gay members of your family and, and the
Yeah,
female tends the mom or the aunt or the grandmother is like, no, 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 be kind, be nice. Not that your mom was not
yeah.
maybe unkind, but just there was an
Well,
issue.
she was unkind to my sister
Yeah,
plenty of times, but
yeah.
also loved her. It was a very, when my sister and her wife were, I think, one of the very first gay couples to be married in Massachusetts when it became legal in Massachusetts. Their picture with my mother and stepfather in the picture on the beach on Cape Cod was on the cover of USA Today. Um, so my mother, loved and supported her
Right.
on the one hand, But on the other hand, she couldn't escape, I think, the programming that she had of like, what will people think?
Yeah.
Um, which was a frustration and a problem her whole life.
Yeah. Yeah. So speaking, so your mom, what you said she worked 70 hours a week or whatever it was. What did she do? Like, how did she, what was her?
So she had been working prior to the divorce in a variety of different
Okay.
occupations, in like sort of sales and marketing jobs. She actually was on local television on a show called the Avi Nelson Show that was like a cable, like a, I don't know, like talk variety kind of thing.
Okay.
She would appear on that show occasionally. She was a singer as well, but she didn't do that on Avi Nelson. But which was also really interesting because my mom had, I don't know the medical term, but she had a truncated left hand,
Hmm.
which you'll see occasionally. So the fact that she was on television was, again, at that in that era, we're talking the late 70s, right?
Hmm.
Um, Mid to late 70s. But in any case, she went and got a job doing marketing and sales for um, a like 3 or 4 hotel franchise underneath the Sheraton banner.
Okay.
And she did that job, and I mean, she literally just was always at work.
Right.
Um,
What about dad? What was his gig?
he was an attorney, but he was also an alcoholic, and so he was totally irresponsible, and he was great fun to be around. He wasn't drunk when we were with him,
Right.
um, but he was great fun to be around, unless my mother was also there. And when I was a kid, she was usually fun to be around
Right.
as long as he wasn't there. Well, though I should say, when I was little, we would go to the beach, we'd do that, all that stuff, and that was fine. But it was just a very fraught,
Yeah.
tense kind of situation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because he was like a Peter Pan, totally irresponsible, drank too much, was a womanizer, was never faithful to her from like literally the day they met. Um, but that was another era too.
Yeah.
I'm not forgiving him for that,
Okay.
obviously.
But
Um, but yeah, so he didn't give a shit what people thought, and she cared way too much.
right. Oh, that's so that's interesting. They were really, in that sense, complete polar opposites.
Yeah, yeah, totally incompatible in that way
Right.
for sure.
Right. Right. There was no middle ground with them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So let me ask you, what's your heritage? What's the background of your family?
um, so my mom uh, was Italian and French Canadian,
Hmm.
and my dad was Irish.
Yeah. Okay.
But interestingly, when I did the 23andMe, I
Right.
was 77% Irish.
Okay. All right, there you go. Okay.
So
Fair.
I think my mother's French side, I think, might have been a lot more Irish than they thought.
Okay. Did she speak French at home?
No, she spoke a little bit of French, but
Okay.
she wasn't from her mother. I can't remember if my grandmother was born in Canada. I can't remember.
Okay.
But no,
So
she spoke a little French, enough French, but
okay. Fair enough. So what was it like growing? So talk to me. What was it like? So you're growing up in the Boston area, 70s, 80s, like me. So what was it like back then? What?
look, I talk all the time about how little did we know in that era that if you were a straight white kid, you were living in the best time you could possibly be living in,
Right.
right? I mean, it was compare it to now, and you can't even imagine. I can't even imagine having the kinds of concerns that my kids have, or that my grandchildren will have someday. Um, it's just insane. But no, it was. I used to say it was sort of, my house was sort of like the outsiders, because my mother was never home. My brother and I were always like out, being juvenile delinquents.
Yeah.
Um, and it was what you read about and what you probably experienced too. Like it would be, even on school days, you come home from school, you go outside, you
Yeah.
come in for dinner, and sometimes, at that point, my brother usually would have to make dinner for us.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, I was a latchkey kid. Yeah.
yeah, or we'd order pizza,
Yeah.
Um, on the weekends, you just it was just you go outside,
Yeah.
you
So
know.
so what were you into as a kid? Like what was your deal? Were you were movie, sports, books, theater, everything? Like what was your deal? What were you into?
Weirdly, I was never a sports kid.
Okay.
Um, I went to Catholic school for 12 years.
Mhm.
Uh, we did go to church much, but I went to Catholic school. I was never a sports kid, but I played uh, a portion of a season of football, Pop Warner football,
Mhm.
which I hated.
Okay.
Uh, I played Little League baseball for a couple of years. I played like Catholic League basketball all through middle school. I sucked at all of it.
Okay.
Um, but I was also a theater kid, so I had the opportunity. Like in my middle school, we did we did The Wizard of Oz and we did Scrooge,
Right.
and then in high school, senior year, my high school brought back. They hadn't done drama for years, and they brought it back my senior year, and we did Fiddler on the Roof. And simultaneously with Fiddler on the Roof, a friend of mine who was in the show with me, he and I also did The Sound of Music in our town's sort of like local production.
Right.
Um, so that was great. But look, what was I into as a kid? Of course, uh, I started out on the Twilight Zone, and
Yeah.
I in reruns, obviously. I became obsessed in reruns with Kolchak the Night Stalker. I've told the story a million
Yeah.
times about how my dad had a lot of flaws. But when I was like, however old I was really little, like 9 or something like that. I had seen one episode, and I looked at the TV guide and I found when it's on. And my dad would actually wake me up. I'd go to bed at whatever time it was, and it was on at 11 o'clock at night
Right.
in
Yeah.
reruns.
Oh,
And he'd
cool.
wake me up to watch it, and then I'd go back to sleep.
Oh, cool. That's a great
Um,
that's a great memory.
yeah. And a really formative, that show is really formative for me. So Kolchak the Night Stalker. But again, so I was, you know, I'm a ridiculous cinephile now, but even then, I was always dragging my friends to the movies. I
Yep.
was always like saying, "Let's get this." I was one of the first people I knew to have a VHS recorder.
Same here.
Yeah, well, so this is the thing. Like my mom, for all of her flaws, she loved us so much, and she was a really good mom when I was a kid.
Yeah.
And she did like layaway. People would be shocked to know. So you can buy a VCR right now for probably like $40, right?
Yeah.
So the first VCR we bought, which was the top loading,
Yep.
like
You
I
had
don't
one.
remember
Yep.
the brand,
Mhm.
but it was a top loader, uh, and
RCA.
it was over $700.
Yeah, I was gonna say the one we had was I remember it was the big heavy clunking one with the
Yeah.
big buttons. It was $500.
Yep.
And I remember at the time, so we of the friends that I had,
Yep.
we were the first family to have a VCR and the first to have cable, like with the long wire and
Yep.
with the buttons. And they were like, "Oh my God, you must be rich." And I'm like, "Dude, we are so
Yep.
not."
No, my mom paid in like
We're not, believe
little
me.
installments because she knew how important it was to
Yeah.
me. Like I really always she was always super supportive of all of that stuff,
Right.
which was amazing.
So,
And
so at that age, were you,
yeah,
you know, of course, that was the age of, Star Wars and Jaws and on and on. But were you a horror kid then, or did that come later?
so my writing brain and my consumer brain or my reader brain, very different, right?
Yes, me too.
So I have a much broader taste when it comes to what I am attracted to.
Yeah.
So of course horror was always like the thing that got me going the most.
Hmm.
But I loved it all, man. I just loved it all. In fact, my uh from the time I was 12 until I was 18, my uncle had a liquor store that my grandfather had owned originally, and I worked for my uncle at the liquor store for those 6 years from 12 to 18. And yeah, you could be a 12-year-old working in a liquor store in those
Uh-huh.
days, as long as you stayed in the back room.
Uh-huh.
Uh, but when I got into high school, I actually worked two jobs. I also worked at Video Plus, which was one of the big video
Yeah,
stores.
yeah, I worked at one too.
Yep, all through high school, and then I worked at a video store in college as well.
Yep.
Because I just wanted to, and they were great because they would let me do whatever the hell I wanted. The one when I worked in high school, so I reorganized all the sections. I was like, there, you can't just have a science fiction fantasy section. You need a science fiction and a fantasy section.
That's right.
You need a classics section. You can't just,
Uh-huh.
So I just had a blast with that. But yeah, man, I was just into everything, and but horror movies, I would drag my friends to see everything.
So just give me a couple. What were your big ones back then?
Um, at the movie theater, you mean?
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, not horror, but like I went to this isn't horror, but I went to see Ghostbusters 5 times in the
Sure.
theater.
Oh yeah.
Saw Raiders 5 times in the theater.
Yeah.
The whole thing. But horror wise, like I remember basically persuading all my friends. They wanted to go see An Officer and a Gentleman, which we did eventually see. And it's a terrific movie. But I dragged them all to see Q the Winged Serpent.
Yes, I remember that. Oh my.
And they gave me no end of shit, but of course I loved it.
Yeah.
I remember seeing my brother and my friend Steve Williams and I went to see The Gates of Hell, which was showing at a little tiny movie theater.
Right.
And I'm pretty sure we were drunk, which was not uncommon
Uh-huh.
in high school at that point. But there's a scene in the movie where the priest is being cursed by a witch or something, and he starts to vomit up his organs.
Right.
And I just remember being like, this is the greatest thing ever. So yeah, I mean, but yeah, so it was all that, and comics as well, comics and books, and
Okay, so what?
every single time we went to the movies,
Right.
it was Shoppers World in Framingham, or there was a General Cinema there. There was a Saks Cinema across the street. There was another. So we would have, I mean, 8, 9, like, I don't know, like 20, 21 different screens within half a mile.
Yeah. Wow.
Right. So
So
we could see anything. Creature from the Black Lagoon in 3D when
yeah.
I was, decades and decades after it originally came
Yeah.
out.
Yeah.
But anyway,
So
in Shopper's World, there was a Laureate's books.
right. Okay. So what were you reading back then? What was your fix?
I mean, I guess when I was really young, although it's sort of concurrent, I think. I loved the Doc Savage books. But I just remember the finding. I can't remember which book by Stephen King was the first one I picked up.
Yeah.
I think it was Salem's Lot.
Mm-hmm.
But it was also like we'd be down the Cape and I'd be in a pharmacy and there's a spinner rack in the pharmacy and there's this garish, like skeletal hand coming out of a puddle of blood, and it was an anthology called Terrors, edited by Charles L. Grant.
Okay.
And I picked that up, and so then it was just nonstop. I'd go in every time. I'd go in and see what was new. And there was no horror section, obviously.
Right.
So you have to kind of go through. But I also read a lot of. I read everything Michael Moorcock. I didn't read a lot of fantasy. I read Tolkien. I read Michael Moorcock. I read a few other things, but that was really it.
Okay. So just as a quick side note, just because you mentioned Doc Savage, so I'm part of Crazy Eight Press, and we put out some anthologies the last 4 or 5 years, one a year, thrilling adventure yarns. But for the first three of them, I think, or four, we have the rights to the unpublished Lester Dent stories. So we got to publish never before seen Lester Dent stories.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah, yeah, very.
I think, and again, I loved that stuff.
So
But yeah, book wise, and then I was reading all kinds of horror, but I still remember, I remember the first time I picked up the Books of Blood by Clive Barker. I remember buying Stalking the Nightmare, which was a Harlan Ellison collection.
yep.
I remember Haunting. There was an Annie's book stop about 3 miles from my house. and they did have a horror section, and it was a really significant one, quite a big section, and so many books I bought. And the lady there wasn't really that into horror, but she was really sweet and supportive, and uh, she turned me on to Algernon Blackwood.
Okay.
So it's just like a little bit of everything,
All right, fair enough. So let's shift gears just a little. So we talked about what you read, what you watched, but talk to me when you started writing.
So I would say that the very first okay, so I had written a story um, when I don't even know how old. That was a basically fan fiction, and it was me taking like Doc Savage and Robin Hood and the Master Gunfighter, which was a character from television, and one or two other characters I can't remember at this point. And I wrote like the first chapter of an adventure story of them. They're like on a plane, and the plane crashes in the jungle, and I
Right.
don't remember, but and my mom read it, and obviously was happy. But I don't remember anything else about it. But the first time I wrote a story that I took seriously, um, I feel like there were two of them, and I'm trying to remember which was the first. I think the first one might have been called something like The Other Half. I don't remember exactly, but I wrote that one in high school. I wrote about maybe 8 stories in high school, and that one was about a bunch of kids drinking at the train tracks, and they get drunk, and the train comes, and one of them is going to get hit by the train, and his buddy tackles him out of the way, but his buddy gets killed. And so he's living with the guilt of that.
Okay.
Um, and then the first one that I remember in detail is a story called A Cold Familiar Feeling, which has never been published anywhere, I don't think.
Hmm.
Um, and that was about like it starts off describing which was from my life, being at the sink at like 3 o'clock in the morning in my kitchen, getting a drink of water, and like having this feeling like on your back that somebody's watching you from behind, and
Mm-hmm.
it's just creepy in the middle of the night. And but it's really about this guy who becomes obsessed with the idea that he's being followed
Mm-hmm.
by somebody who wants to kill him, and he ends up, of course, killing a stranger that he thinks is trying to
He
kill him.
freaked himself out. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And that was really the first one that I remember. And then, I just sort of went on from there.
So talk to me about, so there are, so as a viewer, as a reader, you have sort of eclectic tastes, horror fan, but being the on the other side, when you're the one clacking the keys and writing the stories, what is it about? I mean, you could write theoretically any genre, but why focus your energies predominantly in horror? Like from the author,
yeah, well, let's
from the,
let's
yeah.
so look, my mom, so I've written in multiple genres. I've written
Yep.
science fiction and fantasy and mystery and all kinds of stuff.
Yep.
But most of my stuff has been horror. And my mom had said to me at one time when I was little, like, and I said this probably in every interview I've ever done. When she was alive, she would cringe every time. But I said it with love. She said to me one time, "Why can't you write something good?" And by good, she meant nice.
Yeah.
Like, why couldn't I write something nice?
Yeah.
And I said, "Well, Mom, I've written romantic stories and fantasy stories and Western stories, but somebody always dies." Right?
Right.
And I think for me, it's just about heightening the stakes. I think that when you're in fear, that's when you understand what really matters. That's when, I always say too, like everybody that you see has something sort of going on in their lives that threatens to sort of boil over at any given moment,
Sure.
that to become a catalyst for real change in their lives. And you don't really know how you're going to react to one of those things happening until it does.
Right.
And so I just find that really interesting. And I also think that horror and comedy are just close cousins.
Yes, they are.
And and I'm not good at comedy, but I do like the sort of cathartic feeling.
Yeah.
And then the other element is the sort of supernatural element. Most of my horror is supernatural, and I'm an atheist. I don't think there's anything other than this, but I do still feel like there's a little bit of magic in hope, in aspiration, in kindness and ambition and all of that stuff. And I think for us to kind of like put stock in those things, it's important for us to to have that moment of weightlessness when if you were to go off in a capsule into space and just get just beyond the atmosphere, you have that moment where you have no gravity.
Right.
That's kind of like the moment that I want you to have if you're reading a supernatural story, which is that moment where you're like, even in the back of your mind, you have to believe just for a minute that this shit is possible.
Yes, that's right. You're right. That's a great point actually, because I ask a lot of folks the same question, and that's really I think you hit something there that to for the fear to really kick in, you have to at least be open to the possibility that
Right.
the source of it, whatever it could be a thing. You don't think
Yeah.
maybe your brain is telling you, but
Yeah. So that's the thing. Like, I don't believe it at all.
right,
I'd like to.
right.
So bring me there. Bring me to that moment of weightlessness where I can have a moment where even subconsciously I'm going along for this ride with you. Uh, and weirdly, even though we're talking about horror and really awful, horrific things, that moment makes the world a better place.
That's right. That's right. Okay.
you know?
Fair enough. All right, just a quick interlude for those folks who came in a little late. If you have any comments or questions for Chris, send them in the chat box and we'll get to a few at the end. All right, so you write solo books and you also, and not just books, but comics, you also collaborate. Talk to me how you work when the distinction between, because I've done both as well, flying solo and your process when you have a co-writer or a co-creator.
Um, every situation is different. I will say that um, writing by yourself is much more intimate, and I think that what you put out, has a higher level of purity. It's more sort of mainline you, um, and uh, I don't know. It just obviously it's more personal. And weirdly, people don't necessarily think about it like this. It's easier.
You don't have to
A lot
negotiate.
of people who don't write or don't collaborate, at least, probably think it's easier because you're not doing as much work. But actually, collaboration is more work
Yes, it's much more work.
than writing it by yourself.
It is. It is. You have
So
to.
why do it? Well, the reason I do it is because what we do is very solitary, and I'm not really, well, I used to say I'm not a solitary person. I've become a much more solitary person, but I love my friends and I admire so many writers, and I think that it's fun to get together and jam, and it is a lot like that. I mean, I don't play an instrument, but I took lessons as a kid, but I sang in a cover band all through high school. Um, and there's nothing like that. There's nothing like that feeling, and so it's great to be able to collaborate. As far as what the collaboration is like, everyone is different.
For sure. Yeah.
So
You've written up some tie-in fiction. How do you like playing in someone else's sandbox?
yeah, I don't do much of it anymore because of time.
Right.
Um, but I really feel like I used to get so much shit. It's hard for younger writers, I think, to understand. It's still probably looked down upon, but I think it's hard for younger writers to understand just how much shit my contemporaries and my peer elders gave me and others about doing it. But there were a whole variety of reasons to do it at the time.
How the worm has turned, though.
Yeah, right. And one of the reasons why I did is I always say, like, I do what I do and I have the life that I have and the career that I have, and my family's been able to have me home. My kids, you know, never had to go to daycare, like all of that. So there have been so many opportunities, and uh, that's all because of the kid that I was.
Mm.
And so I feel like, when I got an email saying, "Do you want to write a Justice League novel?" I'm not going to say no,
Like, hell yeah.
because I feel like that would be a major betrayal
Right.
of that kid,
Right.
and that just wouldn't be right. I would feel like I've just sort of uh turned my back on the whole reason I started doing this in the first place.
Yeah, your inner kid got to play.
Yeah.
Got to play. Okay. So let's go back to Chris and I were talking briefly before we came on. Talk to me about Hellboy. Um, there was a lot of years where I was just, I read every Hellboy I could get. I have a whole stack of them right up on the shelf. And what I thought was always interesting about Hellboy is that two-thirds, for the most part, of every Hellboy story is kind of the same. There's some artifact and some mystery, and we have to kind of go around the world and we have to be really clever and investigate. And then I was like, well, demons here, screw all that. It's basically Hulk smash. That's how they kind of all. There was no like thinking.
A lot of them do have that set up. Yeah.
Right. It's like it's a lot of investigation. Like, well, yeah, we're done with that. Now we're gonna go break some stuff.
Yeah.
So, talk to me about your involvement with Hellboy, and then I want to talk about the movies.
So, uh, here's the thing. This is all part of the same conversation about tie-ins and the things that you love. As a kid, I'm still the same person that I was, which is, if I love something, I want everyone around me to also love it, because I'm like, this makes me feel happy. It makes me feel so good. I want you to have the same feeling. I want you to
Right.
enjoy it along with me. And so for quite a while, for a few years, I was doing a lot of journalism in the comics field.
Okay.
I wrote for a number, Hero Illustrated and Comic Book Collector and Inside Comics, and I also wrote for and was an editor for a short-lived magazine called Flux.
Remember that.
And I interviewed Mike Mignola. I don't remember if it was like halfway through or the first miniseries had been done, but it was very, very early. And we got on really well. I think partly because we have a lot of shared frame of reference, and I don't remember exactly how it happened, but I remember I think we were on the phone one day, because we became friendly, and we were on the phone one day, I think, and I said, I knew they were going to do a new miniseries, a second one, and I said, what would be so cool is, in the Marvel black and white full-size horror magazines from the 70s, in Tomb of Dracula magazine, there'd be prose fiction stories in the back.
Right.
I said, maybe in the back of the next miniseries, you should have prose Hellboy stories. And he said very dryly, and I suppose you'd want to write them. And I said, well, I'd love to read them, but of course I'd love the opportunity to write them.
Right.
And I don't remember where I was with my first novel. I don't know if it was out or coming out or what was happening. But he said, I think he wanted me to send it to him, or however it happened. He eventually said, well, why don't you just write it as a novel? And that led to Hellboy: The Lost Army, which was the very first Hellboy novel. It was so early. I think it was 1996.
Right.
My first novel came out in 94, so I think that was 96. And that just began this sort of 30-year collaboration that we've had, where I've worked on so many Hellboy properties. Tom Snagosky and I co-wrote the first BPRD miniseries there ever was, and I've written a lot of Hellboy comics. I've written Hellboy audio adventures, but also Mike and I co-created. Well, we wrote two novels and a non-Hellboy related and a novella together for St. Martin's Press. Actually, the first book was for Random House. And that led to the Outerverse, which is Comic Books Baltimore and Lady Baltimore and Joe Golem, Occult Detective, which we co-own and co-created those. And so it's just been that I've edited 4 Hellboy anthologies and, all this stuff.
So tell me what you like. Tell me what you like about Hellboy.
So it's actually really simple. What I like most about Hellboy is a thing that I think so many people don't understand. People who don't really pay attention to it don't understand, is that it's actually really layered. And my favorite thing about it is that Mike loves folklore, and he loves to delve into like Eastern European and other worldly folklore,
for sure.
and pull up random things and twist them to make them fit his world. And I do this. I've always done the same thing in my fiction, always from like day one. So I love that. But also I just love how Hellboy is just a guy.
Yes.
He's a demon, but he's just trying to be an ordinary guy and live an ordinary life.
Right.
And even though he's friendly, he's weary and melancholy, and all of that, but he kind of plays it off all the time. And so I feel like there's a lot of depth of character there that casual readers or people who are just fans of the movies don't really get.
Right.
And I love that. And I also feel like, Mike and I both share a very blue collar work ethic.
Yes.
And he gets that from his dad. I think I get that from comics. You always say, comics taught me right from wrong.
Yeah, right. So what did you think about the movies? Did you have any input on them or at all, or were you involved in any way?
So I had no input on the first 2 movies. The second movie had a couple of little homages to my novel, The Bones of Giants, Hellboy, The Bones of Giants. The third movie, I did a draft of. It's an interesting story, because when they were first starting out, it was, and I'm not sure if I'm supposed to talk about this, but I don't care.
Okay, good.
When they were starting out, they were still thinking maybe it was going to be a sequel.
Okay.
And so there was a version of the script that Mike hated. So he, suggested to them that they bring me in, and I rewrote that script. But it was still technically a sequel. And then they came back, and they really liked the script. They came back and they said, well, it's not going to be a sequel anymore. It's going to be a reboot now. And we need you to rewrite it, and we need you to do it this week. And like right away, which of course is never true. I mean, this is the thing about Hollywood. You give it to them and they'll sit on it for months.
Of course.
Right. So that's never true, but they think it's true. There's all this urgency. Well, look, my family comes first always.
Right.
And I had just, we had rented a house in Maine for a week. It was going to be a week's vacation in Maine with my family. And I was like, guys, I'm going away for a week. I'm not doing a stitch of work this week. You want to wait for me to come back? I'm happy to do it. And they were like, no, we can't do that. And they were trying to pressure me to work on it. I was like, that's not going to happen. So that was it. So I was off the project, and which was fine. That was totally fine with me. And then they went. Andy Cosby, who's an excellent writer, did many drafts. Another writer, Aaron Collette, did I don't know how many drafts. Andy ended up doing more drafts, and I just think that they lost the plot. I think actually that people shit on that movie, but if you read the script, the final script, so kudos to Andy and Aaron and and all that. If you read the final script, it's actually really good. Um, but and I think like a great editor could go into all of what they did on that movie and re-edit it, and take out the like the music, it was put together like it was going to be, the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen.
Right.
And I think that was a big problem. So, which is a shame because Harbor was really good.
Yeah.
Although I hated the makeup. But then the fourth one, Mike Mignola and I wrote the script for the fourth one, The Crooked Man. And then again, like I guess I posted about it, so I can say it. Let's just say the budget was originally a lot higher than it ended up being. And Brian Taylor was the director, and he was put in a sort of unenviable position. He was doing his own draft, as directors very often do. But he ran into, I think, some roadblocks, some difficulties because of the budget. So again, I think the movie could have been a lot better than it is, but I actually really like it. And I think that people who love the comic tend to like the movie.
Right. It has the same feel to it, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's creepy, and it's a folk horror movie,
which is really what Hellboy is.
Exactly.
Right.
That's the thing. It's a great Hellboy movie for people who know what Hellboy's supposed to be.
All right, that was great. But now it's a time for a special segment on the show where we spin the wheel. On the wheel are 7 possible categories that fit tonight's theme. Wherever it lands is what you get. And the categories are: Dinner is Served, The Reanimator, Soundtrack of Your Life, Apocalypse, Stranger in a Strange Land, I Am Rocket Man, and Who Would Win in a Fight. All right, you ready? All right, wherever it lands is what we get. Let's see. Then for you, you get for tonight The Reanimator. Oh, I like this one. Okay, so you have died a gruesome death, but medical student Herbert West has offered to reanimate you with a scary serum. Now, if taken, you have a 50-50 chance of returning to life completely normal, or as a zombie-like creature. If, however, you choose to forego the serum, you have a 50-50 chance of going straight to hell. Do you want to be reanimated?
No, because I don't believe in hell.
Fair enough. All right, good enough. All right, so now we're going to pick your poison. I got 3 choices, A, B, or C. I'm not going to tell you what's behind each one. Just pick one, A, B, or C.
C.
C. All right, that was another one of my favorites. All right, Benjamin's Button. Again, you have, much like Benjamin Button, you have I'm going to give you 2 options. Much like Benjamin Button, you can live your life fully in reverse, where you were born incredibly old and then get younger and younger until you reach your cellular state, or you can relive the life you have now, only knowing that any changes you make in your past, knowing how your life has actually unfolded, will inevitably change in all sorts of unpredictable ways, such that your life going forward probably won't look exactly like the one that you have now. So which is it? Life in reverse or life do-over?
Oh my God. I think if I have to choose the 2, it would be a do-over.
Okay, all right, give it a roll. Fair enough. Okay, so now I'm going to give you some truth serum. I got 10 questions for you. You ready? I'm going to go.
I'm not going to promise to tell the truth, but go ahead.
That's fair enough. Favorite flavor ice cream?
Well, Ben and Jerry's chocolate fudge brownie.
Oh, what's one food you will never eat ever for any reason?
Liver?
Oh, same here. Ugh. Bucket list destination anywhere in the world?
Crap. I've been fortunate enough to visit a lot of places. New Zealand.
Awesome. I highly recommend it. Scariest movie you ever saw?
Oh, come on. Ever?
Ever.
Birth of a Nation.
Okay. If you could have one superpower, what would it be?
Light.
Okay, so I know the first part of the first part of the answer, but do you play any musical instruments? And if not, which one if you could?
If I could just do it without actually having to practice.
You can play any instrument you want.
You know, my first answer, like I automatically, it's like, of course, guitar, but really saxophone.
Oh, okay, fair enough. All right, your favorite cocktail, and if you don't drink, your favorite unwined beverage.
I don't drink, and cocktail. I mean, beverage. I don't know. I mean, I drink a lot of tea.
Hey, fair enough. I drink green tea every day. All right. You can see a live performance, sports, music, theater, whatever, any seat, any venue, any time in history. What's your choice?
Holy shit. The Ford Theater when Lincoln got shot, so I could stop it.
Oh, wow. Oh, wow. No one has ever said that. Good on you. All right. If you could get a continuation of any canceled TV show ever, what would it be?
Ah, um, God, there'd be such a list. Um, Kolchak the Night Stalker.
Okay, there you go. All right, good. And by the way, if you're interested, I actually did the 50th anniversary special for Kolchak about a year ago.
Yeah.
It was pretty awesome. All right, so we'll take some questions from the audience if we have any. I don't see any in the chat box, but I wanted to bring up something that we didn't get to in the first half of the show. So you, like me, to different degrees and in different ways, you've been out there in force, protesting, calling for positive change. How do you think about what's going on today in our political landscape, and how does that affect you personally?
I mean, Jesus Christ. So first of all, I don't think that um, I don't think that enough people really understand where we are.
No joke.
Um, because we're beyond politics. We're beyond all of it now. We're literally living in a dictatorship. It may not look like it to some people, but when you have a president and his cronies um, ignoring orders from the court, just saying, nah, we don't feel like it, and the court isn't taking the action that they need to take, which is to send U.S. Marshals to arrest the people who are ignoring their orders, we're living in a dictatorship.
Mhm.
And that is, I think, going to get uglier and uglier and uglier. And the only way we can fight back is to fight against the sort of like laissez-faire
Mhm.
attitudes about it, which is like you need to go out there, you need to be loud. And I love seeing these videos, and the news doesn't show it. You don't see it on CNN, you don't see it on MSNBC. So never mind, talking about liberal media. The liberal media that they're talking about are owned by billionaires. Um, so I love seeing these videos of town halls where all these
Yeah.
Republican diehard veterans are
Going,
showing up
yep.
in mass numbers saying, you're like, hey, we're dying out here because you cut all this VA, all the money from the VA.
I can't even wrap my brain around that.
Yeah. And the thing is, it's like, yes, okay, there's a little bit of, um, there's a little bit of pleasure maybe that you can get out of the leopards eating faces whole thing where people are, you asked for this, you voted for this. But at the end of the day, uh, you know, people are dying
Yep.
like already, and it's just going to get worse and worse and worse. And the economy is going to be is just going to get worse. And my fear is that by the time people really understand what's happening,
Right.
um, we will have gone too far down the road to do anything about it. So I just say, like, you know, I wrote a blog about this recently. I posted about it, but I just really believe that, um, and I'll explain this too. But I really believe that you either believe in equality and justice for everybody,
You don't.
or you don't believe in equality and justice.
Right.
This is very simple. This is like at the end of the day, and again, I'm an atheist, but I also sometimes call myself a Christian atheist because, the whole do unto others thing, right? Like at the end of the day, what people do is none of your business. As long as they're not hurting others,
Right.
it's none of your business. And people should be should be treated equally by the law and by others, no matter who they are, no matter who they love, no matter what race they are, no matter what God they worship or no God they worship, no matter whether they present as male or female or uh, again, I just there's so many different ways, but it doesn't matter. Like it's about it's just about who you are. I would tell my kids all the time, at the end of your life, when you die and you're gone from this world, the only thing that's going to matter and the only thing that people are going to talk about is, were you kind? It's literally the only thing in your life that matters. Were you kind? And so that's where we are. I mean, we're in a time when Elon Musk will go off and say empathy is what, I don't remember what the word he
Yeah.
used.
It's basically it's our biggest detriment.
It's our biggest flaw, our biggest detriment. It's a plague or whatever. And that's exactly what sociopaths and psychopaths say, right? I mean, this is
Yes. I know. It's awful. It's
yeah,
awful.
empathy is all we have. And so the thing is, I would say to people, even if you're the kind of person that didn't care about it affecting other people, it's affecting you now.
Yep.
So get out there and protest. No kings in this country. We had a revolution
Yep.
because we didn't want to have a king
Yep.
who could do anything to us that he wanted without us being able to have anybody speak on our behalf. So anyway, don't get me started. But it is, and again, like
Yeah, I know.
it's just so frustrating. I don't. Why do you care who somebody else sleeps with? Why do you care who somebody else worships? Why do you care what the color of somebody's skin is, or what they wear, what they eat at their dinner table? I mean, it's just insane.
Sure is.
And it's mostly, really, really insecure, like straight white men.
Oh.
Oftentimes it's closeted gay white men who
Mhm.
punish people because they hate themselves. I mean, this is because you see it every day. Republicans like one day I'm proposing this really anti-LGBTQ piece of legislature, and the next day I'm arrested. And I shouldn't even say yeah. Anyway, you all know what I'm talking about. It's just
Yeah.
horrible.
Yeah.
Um,
So, well,
so
that's well,
it's time to circle the wagons and protect each other.
fair enough. All right, guys. So we're just about out of time. So let me share my screen. I got some goodies to share with everyone. So just hang on for 1 second. All right. So, Chris, talk to me, buddy. What am I looking at here?
This is my new novel, The Nightbirds, which comes out May 6th. It's one of my favorite of my books ever.
And what a cover that is. Wow.
Yeah, great cover.
Wow.
Jonathan Bush is the artist. He's done the last like 4 or 5 of my books. He's phenomenal, great designer and artist. And basically, The Nightbirds is about this uh, man and woman who used to be a couple, and the circumstances under which they broke up are pretty grim. Really hurt them, and they encounter each other again after almost 2 years in the middle of a tropical storm when she arrives to say to him, she arrives with another woman and a baby and says, please, like, hide us, essentially. And he works on board a ship called the Christabel, which is a half-sunken century-old freighter off the coast of Galveston, Texas. And a mangrove forest has grown up through the bottom of the freighter. And he's studying it. That's what he does. So he says, yeah, of course, come out. And he brings them out in the middle of this tropical storm. And the things that are after them are now also his problem.
Very cool. Wow. Once that sucker's out in paperback, I'm getting myself a copy, and I encourage everyone else to check it out. This is great stuff. Good stuff on you, Chris. All right. So as for me, I'll encourage you to check out Murder in Montague Falls. Montague Falls has three noir novellas. This is sort of a crime and horror mixture. The protagonists in the three tales are teenagers, but this is not YA. This is adult fiction. Now, the teenagers went to the same high school, but the tales are set in three different decades. Now, in the first one, which I wrote, which takes place in the 1980s during the Reagan era Russian Red Scare, when we thought there were spies living amongst us, which is turning out to be more prescient than I ever thought. Loosely based on something that happened to me. A paperboy is collecting on his route one night. He knocks on the door. Nobody answers. So he puts his face up against the window to see if anyone's home. It's dark. There are shadows. He thinks he sees his elderly customer get murdered. He freaks out, doesn't know what to do. He's only 15 years old. He hems and haws. He finally decides to investigate it himself, and his life gets rather dangerous. And the second story, written by Sonny Hatton, it takes place in the 1990s, and it's set against the satanic panic and based off the West Memphis Three, where this girl Natalie is obsessed with Satanism, pentagram, the dark arts. Well, these two best friends, they're not the sharpest tools in the shed, and they're both vying for her attention. She knows it. She uses that to manipulate them, sucks them deep into her world, and boy, do things get grisly. And in the third tale, written by Pat Thomas, it actually takes place in the 1950s, classic noir. A sultry high school teacher seduces one of her students in the hopes that he will murder her husband. And that's what you get, all three in one book. They're all creepy and scary and sort of bloody. So if you like some mystery and horror all blended together, then I'll recommend that you check it out. And we are going to do a sequel, which will be coming out in the fall of 26. Murder in Montague Falls is available on Amazon and published by Crazy 8 Press. All right, folks, that's our show. I want to thank my guest, Chris Golden, for coming by and talking to us about his life and books and comics and the world gone mad. And to everyone who's watching at home, thanks again. And as always, be gentle, be kind, be generous of spirit, and for God's sakes, defend democracy, the Constitution, our healthcare and Social Security, which we fucking pay for. And I'll see you all next week. All right, guys, that's it for me. And bye now.